Sharing. All right, we are live on YouTube. Christopher Hendrix is joining us from Blameless. So welcome everyone to the DevOps Online Summit. This is one of our Ask Me Anything sessions. Those are a fun and easy chance for you to jump in and talk to a DevOps professional like Christopher Hendrix from Blameless. So Christopher, why don't you just start out, kind of tell everybody, your session went live a little bit ago. So some people probably saw that, but some of them maybe you're watching that later, but just kind of let them know who you are and let us know a little bit about Blameless, who is, I want to give them a shout out, thank them for being a platinum sponsor for this year. So Christopher, why don't you just take it yourself there?
Sure. My name is Christopher Hendrix. I am a staff software engineer, developer, evangelist, and all-around jack of all trades. I work for Blameless. So Blameless is a company that helps support you in your journey towards adopting SRE and DevOps. We offer kind of product-based solutions in helping you keep track of incident management, production incident management, to perform kind of postmortems and retrospectives on your incident management. And we've got some cool things coming up in the SLO space and new products in the SLO space that's coming soon. So follow us on Twitter. I believe it's at Blameless HQ. And you can learn more kind of about our products and our solutions. My session was called SRE as Organizational Transformation, Lessons from Activist Organizers. So kind of the impetus for the session really came from me and my own background in consulting, where we weren't only selling you a product, but in order to help you actually use the product better or help you enable outcomes within your organization, you had to actually change people's behaviors. You had to change people's minds. You had to get an entire organization working in new ways. And in software and in technology, we tend to think that that's a very easy problem to solve, that you can just buy a thing off the shelf and suddenly people will use it. And those of us who've been in the industry realize that that is not at all the case. And so at a certain point, you have to learn what it means to influence people. You have to learn what it means to help drive a transformation project. And the larger the organization or the more set in the ways that they are, the harder that is to do. And so you don't have to feel disheartened by the fact that you have to perform this kind of people work or this change management work. And that there's a lot of places, interesting and novel places to turn to learn how to be better about influence and how to be better about change and transformation.
Yeah, that's so important. I think, and I think we talked a little bit about it in your session too, Christopher. But we always kind of gravitate to that technology, but that influence, those soft skills. I know sometimes people say derisively, potentially, but I think they're so important. That you mentioned the influence. That is, obviously so true. Anytime you're doing an organizational change, a technical change, any type of change, influence is critical, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because in the old days, we would call it charm or charisma sometimes. And for those of us who play, tabletop role-playing games, charisma is a stat that you put points into, next to dexterity or intelligence or wisdom or something like that. Charisma is one of those things that you can actually invest in getting better in. And I think people sometimes misinterpret or think of these kinds of soft skills as being manipulative almost, as not being genuine in what they're doing. But I will tell you that if you have best interests at heart, if you're trying to transform an organization not for your own kind of political gain or anything like that, but because you are a part of the industry, you've seen that DevOps is the way of the future. And there's a reason why people are clamoring for it. There's a reason why the SRE book was so transformative in the industry because people see that it's showing them patterns and practices that they haven't been exposed to in the past. And so you can learn from other people instead. And so once you've learned from other people, well, the next step is to implement those practices. And sometimes that takes coordination.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as easy sometimes as we think. I know we can kind of think that that's going to be the easy part. And that's not. I,
Yeah.
I have actually a speech that I'm working on called Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy, where I say essentially the technology, we can figure that out. It's the humans that we have. And it seems like that, as I talk to a lot of technologists like yourself, Christopher, they've run into similar problems.
Yeah, I think that happens more and more the more experience you get in the industry. The further and further away you get sometimes from IC work or technical or tactical work, the
Mhm.
more you realize that a lot of it is in changing people's minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. And one of those things that we often overlook, but kind of back to Blameless and your SRE platform, what are some things that people that you see as you work with people at Blameless that, some core pieces of your functionality that really help kind of transform the way people work?
Yeah, I mean, the core of our product is in incident management, and that to me is one of those transformational practices that people are learning how to do well. Um, so I see reliability and site reliability engineering and DevOps, all of this work as really completing the value stream. So a lot of Agile and XP was around getting organizations to understand that um, you want to optimize for time to value delivery and you want to remain as responsive to the market as possible. So you want to be as good as you possibly can at listening to a customer demand or a signal in the market and going and chasing what does that problem actually mean? What are they having a problem doing? What's the market opportunity for solving this for them? And then get as good as possible at making very small slices of that value, delivering it into the hands of your customers as quickly as possible, and getting validation, right? So that's kind of all the Agile, XP, and even DevOps practices. Now, the next piece of it that really SRE is all about is like, well, once a piece of software is in your customer's hands, you haven't stopped there. And in
Mhm.
fact, they derive value from your product every single time they touch it and utilize it. And so in reality, the reliability of your product is a core part of the value proposition because if they can't use it, they can't derive value from it. You've got a problem. It doesn't matter how much time you spent doing delivery. It doesn't matter how much time you spent doing discovery. If the reliability isn't there, you've lost them. And so, site reliability engineering or service reliability engineering, all of these kinds of things are really about investing equally in recognizing the reliability. And one of the things that you find, especially if you're running software as a service, is that you end up in these degraded performance states. So a customer will come to you and they'll say, I have a problem running a certain thing that I was trying to do. I have a problem doing this thing that I was using your product with. And you have to then say, oh crap, what do I do about that? You know? And in a lot of, I would say, dysfunctional organizations or early maturity organizations, the chaos that comes about from being exposed to the fact that you have a production incident is hard to manage. It's hard to deal with. You don't know how to talk to the customer about it. You don't know how to get everyone aligned on the severity or the impact of the thing that you're working on. You don't know how to keep all of the information in one place that's going on about discovery of what that problem was, what the mitigation steps were towards doing it. So there's this whole practice around incident management and becoming really mature at your incident management processes and practices that is a key part or a key benefit unlock for service reliability or site reliability engineering practices. And Blameless as a product fits right in there by really teaching you how to and supporting you along the way learn how to make an incident management practice and learn how to continue to use it, and then learn how to mine your incidents for information. So performing a postmortem after you do an incident is a key part of this continuous learning, continuous adaptation cycle. And then performing reliability insights to see, which of our services show the most resilience, which of them show the least resilience, and using that as kind of a governance or decision-making strategy for investing in the continued resilience and continued reliability of your services.
So as we kind of take a step back, when we look at something like site reliability, really gathering some insights to see, where are the issues coming from? And I'm guessing we can probably get some pretty good statistics to understand. And I guess this is one of the things in predates the site reliability, but I remember working on the different web services and web products that, you kind of have an idea that, this one process is always an issue. But with a product like you guys or what you guys are sharing, that's kind of one of the traits you want to focus in on, the data, right? To understand where things are and then where to look.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned SLO, and I don't want to tease kind of our own product or what's coming out, but I can just talk about what SLOs mean in general, not necessarily just with the usage of our products. But we talked about incident management, and incident management is really valuable as a first practice because you're likely already encountering production incidents. And so having kind of more formal structure or more formal processes around how you manage those and how you learn from them is really valuable. But some of the later maturity practices in site reliability engineering have a lot to do with earlier detection and discovery of potential issues that people are going to encounter. So getting out of the reactionary incident management system and instead towards the proactive service monitoring. And some of the problems that you see there is like you end up with a glut of information. You have all of these product vendors that you can instrument your applications with, and you can get all kinds of metrics being sent every which way about like, oh, well, is the service up? Is it running? Who's hitting it? And all that kind of stuff. And that's great because information is great, but there's a cost to finding the signal through the noise in that kind of information. And so service level indicators, service level objectives are another practice that's meant to proactively define what a service reliability signal is. And so that's kind of one of the later practices, and then you can go even further when you're talking about reliability and decision making. You can talk about statistics when you're talking about, well, how many incidents have we encountered per service? But you can also say, well, what's the historical burn rate, for instance, of what we call an error budget in any of these services? And you can see like, for some reason, every single month for the first 3 hours of the month, we burn through 60% of our error budget on this service. And you can say, well, the human brain is great at kind of pattern matching in these kinds of situations, and you can say, well, there's something probably to look into there.
Yeah. So now you talked a lot about kind of a maturity continuum, Christopher. So talk to us a little bit about kind of what I'm guessing you can probably start with maybe an organization doesn't even have an incident response policy, but then walk us through, as you talked about, as organizations mature, what are some things along the way? Because you mentioned some already, but I bet there's probably some more in that to kind of share that with us.
Yeah, so I would definitely say kind of structured incident management is the first one, which we spoke about. It's usually one of the first things a company has to figure out when they hire like a customer success organization or a customer support organization. But part of the maturity is how well aligned your engineering organization is with your CS organization. If there's this hard wall and it's always just like bugs being thrown over the wall or support tickets being thrown over the wall, that also kind of betrays a lack of maturity in your incident management responses. A lot of the DevOps philosophy is around kind of breaking down those silos and combining engineering resources with infrastructure resources with operational resources, and having everyone instead aligned on the same goal and having the same incentive structures, which is keeping the reliability of these services. I would say kind of one of the next major steps is in even just understanding your own product's value and the major value streams or the major user journeys that happen in your product. One of the things that you'll encounter after you've done incident management for a while is you start to say, like, well, we have limited resources. Which of these do we prioritize? Which of these is the most impactful? Which of these are people using most often? So you have to then know your own product well enough to answer those kinds of questions, to say this is the most impactful user journey, or these are the most impacted customers, for instance. So getting a sense of your user journeys. And then we talk about defining SLIs and SLOs as kind of a next major step. So a service level indicator is like I said, a proactive measure of reliability for a specific user journey. And the indicator is valuable to get everyone aligned on, well, how do we measure that this service is acting reliably? How do we say that this was a good usage versus a bad usage of that, or whether or not someone was encountering an error versus not encountering an error? That's a natural follow-on towards after defining a user journey. And then the next mature thing is to set an objective for that SLI. So people have heard like 1 9, 2 9s, 3 9s, but you don't have to choose any nines. You could have 85% as your SLO, but really it's a measure of how much is an acceptable level of unreliability for a particular service. And that's usually a hurdle for organizations. That's a pretty big hurdle for organizations because it usually requires just making it up to start and then iterating. And that kind of agile adaptation is usually an organizational muscle that people are not the greatest at. That's why agile still encounters issues when people are trying to do it. And unless you have historical data that really says like, oh, this was all the times that the customer complained, it's very hard to state off the bat that like, oh, we need 3 9s in this, for instance. But once you've got a measure of these service level indicators and these service level objectives, it really acts as a rallying cry and a rallying force for an entire organization to have a very concrete and metrics driven approach towards what reliability means for your business engine. And that is great to get everyone in the same page.
Yeah, that's a lot. You shared a lot there with us, and I took a lot of good notes here, Christopher. And I think you walked us through. I like how you kind of walked us through the structure and getting people aligned, understanding the product, and then really kind of getting that measure around the SLOs, the SLIs, and really, as you kind of mentioned, it's important that we have to have those conversations with the business, so they understand. Because like, I heard as you were talking, I can remember some conversations like this with different places I've been that, somebody might want a number, somebody might say, oh, we always want it up or something, but they have to understand there's a cost for that. And I think that's an important part of, these transformations. If you're doing like an SRE transformation, to have those conversations, right? That there's probably a lot of tough conversations involved.
Yeah, 100%. I would say that those tough conversations and the forcing function of these practices, forcing you to have these conversations, is actually one of the most valuable parts of the practices. The practices themselves are also extremely valuable, but needing to have a frank conversation across product, across business, across engineering that really states, this is what the company cares about and how it cares about it. These are the customers that are the most impactful, or this is the way of using the product that we care the most about the reliability on. Because otherwise, the easiest answer for someone who doesn't think of it in terms of cost versus benefit is like, well, everything matters. And that's great. I love that everything matters, but we run on finite resources. And so
Yes.
Decision making is really what we're talking about. And so we're talking about trade-offs oftentimes. So forcing trade-offs, but forcing those conversations in a way where everyone's aligned on what not the stakes, because I don't like that word. I don't like the pressure that that makes it sound, but
Hmm.
rather everyone's aligned on where the business is trying to go. And so
Yeah.
you're all operating from the same contextual framework. And so you're all making decisions with each other as a
Hmm.
cohort, as
Yeah.
opposed to what usually happens, which is kind of jockeying for position, where everyone's trying to draw a line in the sand and say that their or part of the organization is the one that matters the most, for
Hmm.
instance.
Hmm. Yeah, I was kind of smiling as you talked about, talking about those. Everything's important. Earlier today, we had Julia Wester talk about. She's kind of a Kanban expert, but Kanban really helps us prioritize things, and that's part. As she kind of mentioned, when we say everything's a priority, really, we're kind of basically pushing that prioritization, or basically the idea of that, okay, we have to say which part is important, because as you mentioned, it's good for us to have, as a business or an organization, have everything outlined of what is the real priority. And then we can say, okay, if that's the real priority, if reliability is the most important thing, then okay, we're going to make different decisions than if, okay, maybe
Yes,
we have to have a lower cost solution, for instance, or something
correct.
like that. So it's
Yeah.
good to have those out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kanban is really great about surfacing the idea of work in progress and WIP
Hmm.
and limiting WIP. And people think if you want to do more things, you should start more things, you should do more things in parallel. And those of us who've been in the industry know you should stop starting, start finishing, as
Yeah.
John Cutler says.
Hmm.
And business agility is really happens best when people are highly aligned and highly autonomous. And that can usually only happen when they can focus kind of on what's the most important thing right now,
Hmm.
working from the same amount of information as everyone else about what the company cares about.
Hmm. So as you talk to organizations that are going through like a SRE transformation, you talked about a few things, but bring us back to where a good place is to start, and then maybe some words of advice so as we go along that journey.
Yeah. A good place to start. I mean, I spoke about this in my topic or in my talk about
Mhm.
trying a book club. I will come back to that. Um, I think having people read the same thing together and discuss it is really valuable. If you're thinking about kind of practical or tactical solutions to try and help your organization right now, one thing that engineers can do, I think, or kind of the software side of the professional, is ask why more. I find that the most kind of pathological organizations have actually really degraded their technical staff. They kind of operate in these ticket taking behaviors and ticket taking mentalities, and they've lost their spark almost because they've learned that you don't ask why, that you just do.
Just do it.
Um,
Yeah.
and all of these things are connected, and so you have to start with business value. Also, you have to understand, why am I building the thing that I'm building? And the asking of why should be considered sacrosanct. Like you should always be allowed to do that. And so trying to build a culture of being able to ask why, and hopefully that after you do it a few times, gets a little bit easier, but also begins to get other people in other functions to start asking the same questions. So you can begin to align your engineering side of the house with your product side of the house, with your business side of the house, in really understanding what the business value is. And reliability flows naturally from there, because then you start asking the question of like, well, who's going to own the quality of this service? Or who's going to own when something goes wrong with this service? Or to what degree do we really care whether or not this service is up and running or not, right? Why are we building this? What's the point of this piece of functionality existing? And if you can tell me that, then I can tell you a lot of things about why you should care about its reliability or its performance, for instance. And then we can start from a conversation about, well, how do we actually measure that performance? How do we measure that reliability? How do
Mhm.
we impact it if it's not as good as we think it should be, et cetera?
Excellent words of advice, Christopher. Thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you, and of course, thank Blameless for being a platinum sponsor, and appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Well, we appreciate Christopher's time. We're going to end things here, but want to make sure if you have any questions, feel free to post them on Slack and we can answer them there. And we'll be having other conversations later. But thank you so much, everyone. And we'll talk to you later.